Christy Williams, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the concluding program of this, the 19th year of the Arts Cafe Mystic. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, really. For those of you new to the Arts Cafe, our mission is to present the nation's most celebrated poets and writers, along with New England's finest musicians, in programs that lift your spirits even as they deepen your minds. And if we have a little fun along the way, so much the better. With your indulgence, I would like to digress a moment with a brief history lesson. It was 1994 when Melanie Greenhouse, Albert Kausch, and yours truly conspired to launch the Arts Cafe. You might be interested to know that it was an otherwise eventful year. You'll remember that Bill Clinton was president then. It was the year of the Markale massacre, when a Serbian mortar killed 68 civilians in a Sarajevo marketplace. Thank you. When Byron de la Beckwith was convicted of the murder of Medgar Evers. When the Church of England, bless them, ordained its first woman minister. When South Africa held its first multiracial elections, resulting, of course, in the election of Nelson Mandela as their president. When hundreds of thousands died in the Rwanda genocide. When the Channel opened between England and France. When Canada, the Canadian Parliament, designated ice hockey as Canada's official winter sport. What would we do without government? 1994 was also the year, you'll remember, that O.J. Simpson tried to make his slow-motion getaway in that Ford white Bronco. When the Irish Republican Army announced the complete cessation of military operations. When Bill Clinton signed into law the assault weapons ban. When the U.S. staged a bloodless invasion of Haiti and restored President Aristide to office. Wouldn't we all love more bloodless invasions? When Newt Gingrich and the Republicans swept to victory in the House of Representatives with their contract for America. When former President Reagan published a letter announcing that he had Alzheimer's disease. When a French magazine published a letter announcing, when a French magazine published photos of President Mitterrand's secret daughter. And when Sweden, of course, legalized civil unions between same-sex couples. God bless Sweden. That year, the great and weird beat poet Charles Bukowski died. So did Richard Nixon, Jackie Onassis, and Harriet Nelson of Ozzie and Harriet fame. And to conclude, it was in 1994 that Vice President Al Gore convened the so-called Superhighway Summit to explore the economic potential for the burgeoning Internet and World Wide Web. I conclude with this factoid because in the year we launched the Arts Cafe Mystic, there was no Google to Google anybody like poets we wanted to present. There was no whitepages.com to find their addresses and telephone numbers, and no Amazon.com by which to buy their books of poems. It was hard. Hell, nowadays, most poets have agents like actors and ball players. I look back to 1994 with wonder and say to myself, how did we do it? You have no idea what it is like to look Sharon Olds up in the Manhattan phone book and to cold call her to invite her to read her poems in Mystic, Connecticut. 19 years, how about that? All right, enough history. Let's go on with what we think will be a memorable show. Tonight's opening voice is the poet John Stanizzi, whom we are glad to welcome back to the Arts Cafe with a wonderful new book called Dance Against the Wall. Mr. Stanizzi makes his home in Coventry, up there in the quiet corner of Connecticut by Wampgumbog Lake, where he teaches at Manchester Community College and Bacon Academy, but there is no mistaking his poems for quiet. Mr. Stanizzi has been named New England Poet of the Year, and his much anthologized poetry has been featured by Garrison Keillor on NPR's Writer's Almanac. Now, Dance Against the Wall, his fourth book, is certainly his best. Here, as you see, are brave poems of love and loss of family, including the familial bonds we all share with the natural world. These are deceptively plain-spoken poems, but there is no mistaking their emotional power and command of narrative. The poems about Mr. Stanizzi's father seem to me especially poignant, even at their funniest, and their wisdom has clearly been earned. But I'm eager for you to see for yourself. So won't you please join me in welcoming John Stanizzi.
Thank you very, very much. I'm so happy to be back. I'm going to start with a poem called, Christy, thank you so much. I'm going to start with a poem called Snakes. I was getting ready to clean out my kayak, and I flipped it over and I disturbed two snakes that were, they seemed to be tied together in a knot. And in fact, they even slithered off, tied in the knot. And that little experience sort of demystified snakes for me. I mean, there was the satanic connection, and I also thought of people like Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate and Bonnie and Clyde and Frederick West and his wife Rosemary. And here was this snake couple and all the legends and the attendant negative stuff, acting like a couple of interrupted lovers. So this is Snakes. It's August, and I haven't touched the kayak since early June when I couldn't leave it alone. The school year over, summer had begun, the river up and stocked, the days becoming warmer and longer. The process of unwinding was now my job, and every day I worked to get it right, drifting on the copper-colored river that slowed and grew more shallow every day. But soon my focus changed, and I moved on to chores around the house, unclog the gutter, clean the cellar out, re-cement the crumbling steps in front, and before too long, the goldenrod appeared, and Sweet Joe Pie was roughing up the wetland. When I finally flipped the kayak to wash it out, there you were, the wriggling two of you, moving in every direction away at once. Nothing like the evil symbolism, temptation manifest that we were taught. You were more like lovers I'd disturbed, who couldn't vanish fast enough into the shade of the weltered bittersweet that grew up and through the ash tree by the pond. And so I stood in the wake of your hasty departure as you rippled off, less like Carol and Charles, Fred and Rosemary, or even Bonnie and Clyde, and more like Lancelot and Guinevere, or Adam and Eve, running away from fear before something happened they could not change. We lost my dad a little over a year ago after a 10-year battle with Alzheimer's. And fairly early on in his diagnosis, and when he was beginning to lose his ability to drive, something inexplicable happened at my son's house. He put his keys down in a basket, and every few minutes, the car out in front would be running again, and we couldn't figure out if he had gone over there and touched it or something stranger was happening. So this is called the dutiful car. My father makes his way to his grandson's home with his navigator, my mother, at his side. It's not the easiest trip, what with the snow and ice. And these days, driving in the dark is more than he can handle. He's having trouble in the light of day, but in the night, which can eclipse the senses of the best, even with the light of torrential stars, we are asking just a little bit too much. They arrive at the party to everyone's delight, leaving their car by the curb in the frigid cold, and my father wants to know whose house we're at. It occurs to me as I struggle to find the good that it's a bit like seeing everything for the first time, every time that you arrive. You learn to tell yourself these private lies. He tosses his keys in the basket on the table and begins his quest to find a glass of wine. Out in the street, his car is idling quietly, plumes of exhaust wafting in the cold, the parking light's illusion of some warmth, the tranquil, barely audible purr of heat. I notice this and ask him for his keys, press the button of his automatic start, and check to be sure that the car is really off. People graze around the kitchen table, dipping chips in salsa, crunching vegetables, talking loudly over the Yukon game. While out on the street, the car is running again. I surmise that someone bumped the starter in the basket. How else can you explain the fact that my father's empty car is on, warming quietly in the February night? I press the button on the little pad, looking out the window to be sure the car has done what it's supposed to do. The column of exhaust no longer there. The orange lights no longer visible. The guests have now begun to fix their plates. The festive table of cheese and cold-cut platters, tubs of salad, jars of mayonnaise, our favorite team losing another game. Then someone says, "The car is on again." And sure enough, there's that curl of smoke, his car impatient on the icy street, parking lights to guide him to its warmth, the motor purring, the heater on just right. And picking up the key ring one more time, I tell myself another private lie. I think about the dutiful car out front, defying all the odds of technology. So when he walks out into the winter night and makes his way along the icy path, it will be ready, eager to guide his way, having spent the evening insistent on warmth. In the inviting shimmer of parking lights, he will study the maps to bring him safely home. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I'll read another from my dad. Among the terrible things about that disease is that, when you're diagnosed with it, you're lucid enough to know exactly what's down the road for you. And this is a poem about a test that they would give him at Yale. We participated in some research studies over the course of several years, and they gave him the same test every time he arrived. This poem is called DLROW. The first test they give him is to see if he can spell world backwards, which he can, easily. Such demeaning, useless exercises at Yale, Mecca of miracles, where she is sure they'll give him a pill one day to reverse it all and bring him back. But for now, no matter the time of day, his birth date, the season, the one thing he knows for sure is that the world is backwards, and it will be that way from now on. I was teaching a freshman comp class at Manchester Community College one time, and a student, I was so stunned by what he had written that I don't even remember what he was writing about, but he referred to something happening in one false whoop. Now, it took me a second and then I realized he was talking about Macbeth, right? All my pretty chickens and their dame at one false whoop. Mishearing things is just crazy. So anyway, a colleague of my wife's, Diane Walter, a kindergarten teacher, had a little kindergarten kid come up to her one day and say, "Mrs. Walter, can we go to the apple torture?" I just couldn't leave that one alone. So this is apple torture. He must realize that what he will see at the apple torture will be a grove of trees, their branches arched with exhausted full apples, and that it will be nothing like, say, going to the hanging, though both have their obvious similarities. And he could not possibly imagine that his question would bring to mind the crowds that gathered for the pressing, speculating which of the heavy stones would be used next, and would it be the one? And my guess is that he would be frightened by the notion of attending the stoning, where he might actually be expected to participate, though my sad hunch is that eventually he would warm to the idea. Going to the crucifixion might be relaxing. He could saunter up the hill with his peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a couple of juice boxes, an apple, have a seat with the rest of the gang. I imagine he'd be mesmerized by all of them: the drowning, the dragging, the estrapado, the garrote, the waterboarding, the hurling from a great height, and the ever-intriguing being tied in a sack with feral cats. He is in kindergarten, after all. No, for now, I say leave it as it is. It's not such a bad thing that this kid thinks that going to the torture means a day out of school, a ride on the thumpy yellow bus with his friends and his teacher, whom he loves, and being deposited in a throng of fragrant trees, standing in the cool shade, polishing a big apple on his shirt, the only rumble, the tumble of the cider mill, the only discomfort, the bend of branches abundant with fruit, an ache that is relieved by simply reaching up, plucking off an apple, and standing in the momentary faith of childhood, filled with the marvel of having gone to the apple torture. Among my bad habits is smoking expensive cigars. I know it's not good, but I learned it from my grandfather, and he always smelled like cigars, and so I've always associated that smell with him and with love. So in the summer months, from right about now all the way through autumn, I could mow the lawn every day as an excuse to sit on the lawnmower and smoke a cigar. So this is about that. It's called Mowing the Apples. In the fall, as an excuse to have a cigar, mow the lawn every day. Oil-thirsty tappets knocking out a racket all over the neighborhood, vague smoke scent of tobacco and oil. Cultivate the cigar ash until it drops on the belly, then toss the stub onto the lawn, forgetting before it lands where it falls. And later, quite unintentionally, mow over it, spewing old wet tobacco and the surprise of Grandpa's pungent sour breath. Then mow the apples, run over the past again, and cleanse the palate with sweeter memories. Okay. I had read that whenever you see a fawn alone, that the fawn is not really alone, that very close by the mom will be lying down somewhere, keeping an eye on the baby as the baby learns the world. I thought of that one day when a little baby walked out of the woods and came up to my car. It was amazing. So this is Fawn, and it starts with an epigraph from Elizabeth Bishop's The Pink Dog. She says, "A depilated dog would not look well. Dress up, and dance at carnival." Fawn. In the carnival of lights and shadows at dawn, a small, bony dog stands in the road. Elizabeth's dog, watching me curiously from the center line. So I slow for her, and then I see the dabs of softened white. Her right ear twitches, a wary, cautious twitch, and she lopes into the woods, leaving me with a sense of joy at seeing this tiny fawn. But just as I am about to leave, I hear her squawk and see her just behind the scrub at the side of the road where she is watching me, her wise and fearful eyes too big for her. "What are you doing?" I say, "and where is your mother?" She hears my voice and steps back onto the road, looking me straight in the eyes. She bleats a question, but before I can respond, another car comes speeding by and off she runs for good. Before I even have a chance to say that I would lie down near her in the woods while she slept, sheltered on a nest of leaves. And when her mother returned, then I would go, having kept her safe from the likes of me. And I'll finish with a poem called Voices. I know everybody is aware of this, that striking moment when you say something and you actually hear your father's voice come out of your mouth or your mother's voice. Or, you know, sometimes I hear my dad's voice in my children's voices, or it's, you know what I'm saying. So this is called Voices. And it starts, too, with an epigraph, as it turns out, from Elizabeth Bishop, from her poem In the Waiting Room. She says, what took me completely by surprise was that it was me, my voice in my mouth. She's hearing her Aunt Consuela in the dentist's office, and Aunt Consuela gets hurt, and she goes, oh, and Elizabeth hears that. But it's not her aunt's voice she hears, you know, she hears her own voice. So this is Voices. There are times when in my mother's voice, her father's voice distracts me from her words. Doppelgangers speak in some translation that sounds as if she's simply saying hi, when in truth it is her father come to say, in language of the living, that he'd like for me to take a moment and to think of all the time we spent in the shady joints, our elbows on a sticky wooden bar, the half-light, the acrid smell of booze, stale beer, and the years-old reek of smoke. I also hear it when my daughter speaks. My mother's voice addressing me as Dad, asking me if I can watch the kids, and when I answer, my aunt, my mother's sister, answers back, but with her father's voice, in which I hear the tinny timbre of his eccentric mother, Grandma far away, asking if I would like some funny water, in a voice my other daughter borrows to bring me up to speed on all her plans, sounding just like Uncle Rocky did when he'd grin a menacing grin and talk about his tennis game or bothering girls in the flickering darkness of the theater. And then my boy speaks with his brother's voice, but it's my father calling to say his wife is going to have a child, their first. We share the joy with jokes of our advancing age and hope that it will be a boy to keep our name alive. I smile and clear my throat, but it's my father's throat, my father's cough. And there we are, the living and the dead, the living carrying on as best we can, the dead alive in everything we say. Thank you very much.
John Stanizzi, ladies and gentlemen. To announce that we have John Stanizzi's books on sale tonight, including the superb Dance Against the Wall, which would fit nicely on your bookshelf. Are we all right back there? This gives me a chance to thank Mystic's own independent bookstore, Bank Square Books, for continuing to partner with the Arts Cafe. Our little corner of Connecticut is lucky to have so hip and friendly a bookstore. I also want to express our special thanks to the Mystic Arts Center for welcoming the Arts Cafe again. Our community is fortunate to have such a resource, and we're grateful to feel at home here. So, on with our show. Rick Coster, who reviews music for the day, frequently referred to the folk rock ensemble, the River Gods, as the best band in these parts, an assessment with which I have always been in accord. I might add that the River Guards have performed here at the Arts Cafe in years past. Tonight, however, we're pleased to feature singer-songwriter Nancy Parent, who was one of the founding members of the River Gods and who continues to sing and play keyboards and pedal steel for the band. And I know you're wondering if this makes her a sort of riparian goddess.